I know that there has been a lot happening between the documentary and Derick and I releasing our book. So I just wanted to show my face on here really quick. I've been missing in action a little bit, as y'all know now why. And so, yeah, I just wanted to pop on here and say hey, and thank y'all also for the prayers and support. And yeah, we have been doing gardening between work, and so that has been really therapeutic. And my
Hey everyone, it's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Welcome back to my channel. It is Friday, June 2nd, 2023. I had the opportunity in the last day and a half to binge watch the new docu-series about the Duggar family and the Institute in Basic Life Principles on Amazon Prime, and it's available for free for individuals that subscribe to Amazon Prime. When I was watching this, there was a lot of thoughts that I had about the overall scope of the series. It was a very high level look at the Institute in Basic Life Principles, overlapping with how the Duggars sort of implemented the IBLP through their show, and how through the show they were able to recruit for new members to the IBLP. It goes into a lot of the details about the wisdom books, which we've talked about here. It went into details about allegations against Bill Gothard by women. Several women that claimed that Bill had done things to them appeared in this docuseries. There were also sort of a brief understanding of some other scandals related to Bill Gothard's brother back in the 1970s and early 1980s. And a lot of it was really using people from the IBLP that were survivors to help narrate what life is like for someone in the IBLP and what is like to be a Duggar child, because the kids all seem to have consistent experiences across the board and how they experience the IBLP being implemented at home. Jill and Derick Duggar appeared in the series, and while they're listed as the showrunners, or at least Jill is, her voice is by far one of the more prominent voices, but I will say that there's a lot of other voices. And the first episode is heavily about the Duggars specifically. And then throughout the rest of the episodes, you're going to get a lot more interweaving between the IBLP and the Duggars. And so it's not only about the Duggars. So if you're looking for specifics like how did the Duggars handle things with Josh, and what about the investigation, that was all very, very high level. And it was very... what you saw on this channel or on other channels or in the news would have given you a good breakdown of how it was all taking place. So nothing really earth-shattering in that respect. But there is something that I wanted to bring up, because I feel like this confirmation by Derick in a public space has only helped to confirm my reporting that I've done for years. And so I hope that it'll help you guys better understand that I don't make things up when it comes to the Duggars, and that the details about Jim Bob controlling his children's social media is actually something that is sort of verified in this documentary. Because according to Jill and Derick, in order to get paid for the show, after Derick had brought it up to Jim Bob, the kids signed lifetime contracts with Jim Bob and his production company. Yep. And also revealed is that Michelle illegally signed contracts for adult children. So let's dive into today's topic. Before we do, can you please do me a big favor and give this video a thumbs up? Also, please subscribe to my channel if you've not yet subscribed by clicking on the subscribe button down below. Make sure to ring the bell if you'd like to get notified of any time I go live and new content loads, and share this video with your friends. And leave a comment if you have something to say. Let's talk about what I heard being said in this documentary that I think is extremely interesting. One of the things that I've talked about a lot on this channel is the way that Jim Bob controls his family. And one of the biggest criticisms I've had in my reporting is that people see the content that is being put out by Joy, Jessa, Jed, James, Jason, and they all just think that the kids are just posting willy-nilly in free will of like what it is that they want to post, and that Jim Bob plays no role in any of that. And while at least two of the girls, Joy and Jessa, admitted that they made income on their social media, the amount that they actually were taking home was so small. Like, they provided details as a part of a deposition, and I was shocked. For Jessa and Joy having as large of an audience as they did on Instagram and on their YouTube channels, they were not making anywhere near per year what they should have been making. And I remember reading these depositions thinking, gosh, that's so weird. Because I think Jessa said she made less than $30,000 a year, which I was like, there's no way. There's no way. Because she's always posting things and she's always posting videos. And I think Joy had mentioned something like less than 20,000. And again, I was like, there's no way. Well, now it seems as though they may have a contract with their dad, and he's probably taking a chunk of their revenue. And so when you're thinking about consuming content by the Duggars, you need to be very conscious of whose pocket that's going into, because according to Jill and Derick, they were asked to sign a lifetime contract with Jim Bob Duggar. So as part of the series, Jill and Derick go into detail about what led up to them leaving Counting On, and a lot of it had to do with things that were going on the show that they really didn't know they were in a contract for. So Jill mentioned, and I talked about this in a previous video, that she, on the day before her wedding, was asked to sign a document, and she wasn't shown what she was signing. They just asked for her signature, her dad, and she signed it. She said that she was walking out the door and that Jim Bob was trying to grab as many kids as possible to sign this, and he just told her to sign it, and she did. And she explained that having been under the umbrella of authority, she just followed orders and did what he said. Once married, she had no clue that what she had done was signed a contract of a 5-year commitment to TLC. She was able to get copies of contracts from TLC. She said she actually had to go back and ask directly to the network. And she said that she found that, yes, she did sign that. That was her signature. But she also received contracts where it was when she was 21 years old and her mom was still signing her name for all of her kids, including Jill and Jessa and Ginger, who were legally adults. And so even though her adult children were adults, she was still signing for them. It seems so bizarre that a mother would sign a contract for a show with their adult children. And not only that, but TLC was drafting these contracts, and the contracts were between TLC and the Duggar family, and they weren't correcting this. TLC knew that there was adult children. They knew that Jill for sure was an adult, and they had Jill listed as a minor, and Michelle signed for Jill. I mean, that's illegal. So we learned that Michelle was illegally signing her children into contracts with TLC. In 2014, Jill signs a contract that she doesn't know that she's signing, and she finds out only later, while she's in El Salvador, through her father, nonetheless, that she did sign this contract. And it all stemmed from the fact that they were tired of filming in El Salvador. And because of the show, Jill and Jessa Counting On, with them being the showrunner, they said that Jill and Derick had to come back to the United States, and they had to film for Counting On. And she said her dad sent her a part of the contract which specifically stated that company hereby engages lender, and lender hereby accepts such engagement to furnish the services of participant as an on-camera personality for and in connection with the program. Participants' services shall be rendered on a first priority basis. So she was sent this letter that basically it was a part of the contract telling her, and they had it underlined, which said that her first priority was to the show and all other commitments were secondary, and so she didn't have a leg to stand on. And at first she thought that she had forged that the signature had been forged, and then she realized after the fact that she herself hadn't forged it, but that her dad had gotten her to sign this without really her understanding or knowledge of what she was signing. And, another thing that I think is really interesting is that in these contracts, it specifically states that they have rights, ownership, and exploitation. And it basically says that they are being made on a work made for hire basis. And the company, TLC, can produce the content in whatever manner that they chooses. They can take any type of recording, whether it's motion picture, cameras, tape, electronics, and use that in any way that they want. They don't have to negotiate with them about how the content is put out into the media. I mean, to actually see an entertainment contract that says exploitation is really surprising to me. I've never seen that language, although I haven't seen a lot of TLC's contracts. But in black and white ink, it says exploitation. So after all of this goes on, Jill and Derick are like really upset. And Derick says that he asks Jim Bob, like, all right, we'll come back, but it has to be worth something for us to come back. And he said Jim Bob offered him $10 an hour. And at the time, Derick and Jill were like, okay, wait a minute. Like, we've done all of this work. We've been working nonstop for you, and we're not getting paid. They had already delivered a baby and were not paid for the birth. They had already been paid. They had already had TLC basically take footage of their birth and use it for a show. When Jim Bob was paid for that, Jim Bob was also paid for their wedding. Jill's wedding was one of the highest rated shows ever on the network at the time. 4.4 million people tuned in to watch her marry Derick, and Jim Bob pocketed all of that money. Jill and Derick didn't make a dime from that. Jill says to this day she's made $0 from TLC. And when confronting TLC about it, she said that TLC said that she needed to speak to her dad because he's the one that got paid. So once you start to learn about how Jill wasn't getting paid for her very intimate moments, and then she had to give up on things like her mission work that she had wanted to do and they had committed to, you start to understand that she had no choices, and she was at times forced to use food banks and food stamps in order to feed herself and her kids. And after this all comes up, and after Derick sort of like puts pressure on Jim Bob to pay, they say that Jill says that Jim Bob made a decision that he was going to pay the kids a lump sum. And as a part of that lump sum agreement, they said in the Docu-series that Jim Bob would make the kids then sign a contract for life with Mad Family Productions, and that the contract would be that they're committed to making content and being participants in content for their father. And that contract would have been outside of anything to do with TLC because it was a contract to pay them. So TLC was paying them, right? And then Jim's contract was with TLC. And then Jim wanted to put his other children into contracts of his own. So Mad Families with his kids. And that contract would be a lifetime commitment. And Jill said that she and Derick declined. They ended up hiring an attorney, and they got basically minimum wage. But a lot of her siblings did sign this contract. So the only other sibling that didn't sign this contract, from my understanding and based on reporting, is Ginger and Jeremy, because what they did is they actually worked directly with TLC and were able to negotiate their own contract, which was pretty nominal in how much they were making. But the last few years on Counting On, Ginger and Jeremy were in their own contract with the network. And that's why they had a little bit more flexibility than the other kids. And it's why Ginger's had a little bit more freedom of what she posts and what she does and the kind of stuff she says. But the other kids, according to Jill and Derick, believe they're under a lifetime contract. And a couple years ago, Derick was actually talking about this on his Instagram. And he had also told me this in some conversations that we were having on Messenger DM. And he has mentioned that the kids believe that they are in long-term contracts with Jim Bob, that they have signed NDAs. So they believe that they have signed non-disclosure agreements, and they have agreed to not disparage Jim Bob publicly. And that because of that, the kids believe that they, one, can't say anything negative about Jim Bob, can't do anything for content of their own and believe that their dad still to this day has access and control of their bank accounts and the money that they make. So when you start to think about the boys and what they're doing and where they're living, it all starts to make sense because you have kids that are living in housing that's offered by Jim Bob. So Jed lives in a home that's owned by Jim Bob. The trailer that Abby and John live in is on a lot owned by Jim Bob. Josiah lives in a house on property owned by Jim Bob now. Joe and Kendra live in a log house on Jim Bob's property, and they are under Jim Bob's home. They don't own the home themselves. It's the deed and title are not in the names. The deed and title is not in Jed and Katie's name either. Then you look at Jeremiah and, Josiah and Lauren don't live in a home with Jim Bob. It's Jeremiah and Hannah that live in a home that's owned by Jim Bob on Jim Bob's property, and that deed is not in their name. Jason lives in the treehouse. James lives in the warehouse. Anna lives at the big house. And so all of the kids are basically under his control, living on a compound under a lifetime contract that they make content for him, according to Jill and Derick. So here's the thing. I think what audience members need to take out of this, and if they really care about the Duggar kids and they care about their freedom and their safety, you need to start to decide for yourselves if it's really worth it for you to consume content that is directly going to give money to Jim Bob Duggar. As much as you love Joy or you love Jed or you love whoever, you need to start to ask yourself, is it ethical for a father to put his children into lifetime contracts and NDAs and have them make content for him and he pockets the money and then they basically live hand to mouth and don't live lavishly? Now, Jim Bob does float his boys a lot more luxury than he does his girls. And Jed and James and Jason, they've all been able to show off all of the gifts their dad is giving them. I mean, recently, it's no coincidence to me that Jim Bob has sent his kids on trips because it shows, oh, Jim Bob's not greedy. He pays for his kids to travel to Israel and go to Europe. See, he's the most loving, doting dad. It's all propaganda. Or, oh, Jed's going to Hawaii. I guarantee you it's another thing paid for by Jim Bob because he wants you guys to see what's happening on that documentary and say, that's not true. See, my kids go on trips. They're not living meagerly. They're doing things that are luxurious. Look, they have planes that they get to drive and they get to be in helicopters. But yes, that all comes with a price, and that price is their freedom and their freedom of speech and their ability to live independently. Derick and Jill said she grew up in a cult like home. They likened Jim Bob to a cult leader. Jeremy and Ginger have likened Jim Bob to a cult leader. Both couples have said that the other siblings find it impossible to speak out against their parents because every other sibling besides those four people are financially dependent on Jim Bob Duggar and in these contracts, maybe. And at the very end of the video, at the very end of the episode, there was a statement released, and it was through Jim Bob's representative, Chad Gallagher. So Chad Gallagher is still Jim Bob's PR strategist and his media representative. And so another way to prove that the kids are under his control is that he still is employing someone to manage his PR. And what the statement on the show said is, Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar stated through their representative, Chad Gallagher, that they love each of their children tremendously and always desire each live their God-designed lives to the fullest. And that's all they said. Jim Bob and Michelle put out a statement on their website, basically calling it sad and slanderous and salacious. I think audience members need to decide what they think. There was aspects of this docuseries that I thought were well done. There were other parts where I wasn't so keen on it. Overall, I think it's a good crash course for people that don't know a lot about the IBLP. I'll talk more about the episodes in a later video, but that was kind of what was on my heart to share in this video. Oh, and finally, Derick and Jill accused Jim Bob of fraud for putting kids in these contracts and putting them in a contract. So forgery and fraud are the accusations against Jim Bob and Michelle. And are you surprised to hear this? Tell me in the comments below. Bye, guys.